Hey there, David Angel here, and this is episode 3 of the Opportune Conflict, where I take a little nugget of theory from conflict resolution or decision making and try and make it a bit more digestible and apply it to our everyday lives. Now, today's episode is going to be on uncertainty, risk, ignorance, and trust. Now, I think we all use these terms colloquially, and so what I'm going to do is I just want to parse them apart a little bit to give you my understanding of them, how they relate to conflict decision making, and why I think a relatively short episode deserves to be entirely focused just on this concept. Now, when we talk about uncertainty, what we're really talking about is the fact that in any given decision that we are making, there is always going to be a chance of something not going the way we expect. Uncertainty is just a natural state that is present in decision making. If it was a guaranteed thing to happen, even then, the fact that we have a choice between two potentially guaranteed things means that we could make one decision or the other. And so, to someone else, that would be an uncertain situation as well. And it may be to ourselves as well because we might not truly know which of those certain things we want. Are we deciding to be pie and cake? What are we really feeling like? We always have a chance of surprising ourselves. So the real thing is to accept that uncertainty is just a natural part of our daily lives. And a lot of the times we just go right by it, accepting it's happening, use available heuristics to make sure we're making the best decisions we can based on the limited information that we have, and just trying to sometimes get lucky or not get unlucky. So when we talk about uncertainty, there's two real parts about it. It's about, do we have a relatively good guess of what might happen? Do we know those probabilities between different outcomes based on the actions that may be taken, the circumstances that are involved? And do we have an idea about what is a good chance of happening? If we do, then that would be operating underneath risk. Risk is about having a general idea of being able to weight things by the probabilities of whether or not A, B, C, D, etc. will happen. There are going to be other situations, though, where we might just not have enough information or not even know anything about the situation, and we're essentially guessing blindly. When you cannot make any kind of educated guess, that is really when you're operating under ignorance because you don't have an idea actually about any of the probabilities. It could be that it's just not within your range of expertise or it's outside of your wheelhouse. And that's okay because there will be times where we just don't know. And, there are ways around that to some degree. You can say, well, I'll just make everything the same probability because I know nothing better right now, and that's better than not having any numbers on paper. Or there are other times where you can learn more about the situation, and the more you learn, you can then move it from ignorance into risk. You're taking an educated guess, or you're actually making very solid prediction, potentially based on mathematical models or scientific studies. Can drastically reduce the error rate for what we think probabilities might be. But there's always a chance something weird might happen. Now, when we're talking about risk versus ignorance, that does also relate to trust. And in this situation, I'm going to use trust sort of as an example, talking about as we apply it to people or data or information. Normally when we say, I trust this, or I trust you, or I trust that, what we're really saying is I have a pretty good expectation that what I think is going to happen is going to happen. So when we're talking about trust, we're operating underneath risk. In terms of the uncertainty. If I trust you to do the right thing, it means that I'm pretty confident in my assessment of the probabilities that you will do the right thing. And there is that sometimes moralistic bent too when we say I trust someone. And that really shows up when we say the opposite and we tell someone or something that I don't trust you. Now, the reason I find that interesting is because we use that in two different ways. One applies to risk and the other to ignorance. Sometimes when we say, I don't trust you, especially to a person, it means I trust you to do the wrong thing. In which case, we're actually still talking about trustworthiness of being able to predict what someone will be doing. There are other times, however, where we use I don't trust you or I don't trust that to mean we're actually operating under ignorance. It may be a really good liar that also tells the truth. And so because we're like, I just don't know, it may be a 50-50 chance now in your brain because you just don't know them well enough to really know their tells. Maybe, or perhaps you're playing poker and you can't tell if they're bluffing or not. And that's when you're operating underneath ignorance when it comes to trusting someone or not trusting someone. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind because a lot of our decisions are based around the idea of being able to trust. When we're talking about being able to weight risk for outcomes, we're talking about being able to trust the actions of others, or trusting the data in front of us, or trusting the expertise advice we've been given. We're operating under trust to assign the weighted probabilities for what we think might happen. And sometimes we're wrong. And sometimes it's just because we're not omniscient and we just don't know everything. It could be someone telling you guess heads or tails and not thinking that there's like a 1 in 5 or 6,000 chance that it could land on its side. That would represent a gap in our knowledge base about a decision problem we are faced with. And that's really the key part about why we operate underneath so much uncertainty. And I'll just come back around to the start of it all, that because we are limited for time, we're limited for information, we have limitations on how much we can know the future. And that is why we operate underneath uncertainty. And the nice thing about that is a lot of the times we don't have to put a lot of thought into making an educated guess. We have available heuristics we can hold on to that work reliably well under most situations. But sometimes our thought processes fail us. And so it's just nice to be able to keep in mind whenever you're facing a decision problem you have to, resolve, to think, how certain am I about the information, about the probabilities of what will be happening next? Was there a gap that I might be missing out on? Is there a reason that I might know better than someone else? Or am I operating underneath a cognitive bias that may actually be sabotaging my confidence in my ability to assess my conflict right now? Anyhow, I think really that's where I'm gonna end this episode on today, is just keeping in mind that we always operate a sense of uncertainty, but it's not something to be terrified of. And that a lot of the times we have a good idea of what may be happening. We can assign risk to our various options that we have at hand. Sometimes we're going to be operating underneath ignorance. And if you know that's the case, then that actually can help you make decisions with a bit more confidence, because it's better to know that you don't know than it was to assume you had an educated guess that may have been weighted just because you wanted a certain outcome more than the other, or because of a different cognitive bias that may have come in to try and fill the gap and make you think you knew more than you might have. And then just when we apply trust to information, to other people, that the degree of which we are able to trust those people, that information, informs us about the own decisions that we want to make ourselves. And so it's okay if you don't know enough information, or you don't know if you can trust someone, but as long as you're able to trust your gut and your information about whether or not you can, that's a great place to start. Anyhow, I am going to end this episode here. I hope you've enjoyed this little talk and it gave you something to think about, and I will see you again next time. Bye.